Good evening, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to another episode of Critique Corner with me, Daniel Parker.
And me, DB Fastbinder, at a new time and also with new equipment.
Yes, yeah. Both of us have got new microphones. Hopefully, we sound better than we do with these, headset ones. Um, yeah, and we're trying something new. Going an hour later to try to see if people will like this or not, or if it works for us.
Yep. Honestly, it was me selfishly wanting some more time on Thursday afternoons to get ready or to finish up things after work.
Yeah.
Eh, but if you all reject it, we can go back to the old time. So we'll find out if it makes a difference.
Yes, indeed. Well, if you are returning, welcome back. If you're new, what we do here is we critique stuff. We review, usually something new or recent and something classic, and we'll occasionally have something that been watching separately. And we've also kind of decided that in the past we've talked about the box office results, but I think we're probably going to phase that out completely because we haven't talked about it for a couple of weeks, and it's nothing because mainly because nothing's interesting has happened with that. So
Uh, right. I mean, if we had a Monday night show, maybe.
maybe, yeah, but
Uh, but also, hi, Arco Sloth.
oh hey, Ericos.
But yeah, I mean, from just like a nuts and bolts perspective, it made the least sense out of what we were doing because usually we just talking about our opinions of different media. Um, was like we didn't usually end up watching the things that we were talking about the box office of, and also just it was usually the least viewed thing unless it was something extremely interesting like a the Marvels type flop or whatever.
Yeah,
So
or yeah.
so like if we have a situation like that where we think we have something to say, then we'll bring it back. But by
Yeah.
and large, you're here to hear us give our opinions on movies, not necessarily doing like deep literary dives, but more of just the opinion of or perspective of, hey, is this worth your time?
Right, indeed. And our first movie tonight is probably going to be in the category of probably not.
It stinks.
It stinks. Yeah. Yes.
So Netflix cut Paramount a check to, and I think this one also had MGM involved with it for some reason.
Yeah, and not entirely sure why.
Had to be some sort of rights issue.
Yeah.
But we decided to subject ourselves to the Snake Eyes movie from a few years back, one of Hasbro's various attempts to get a toy universe going.
Yes. This was, of course, after the recent Transformers movies, particularly Rise of the Beasts, which had a post credit scene that hinted at GI Joe.
Yeah. And also the Bumblebee movie, which had John Cena playing somebody from G.I. Joe, as I recall.
Probably, yeah, yeah. But yeah, so they decided to give probably arguably the most popular character from GI Joe his own spin-off movie. That of course being Snake Eyes. Now, for those of you who probably aren't familiar with GI Joe lore, yeah, Arcos, yeah, it's not very good. um,
Right. So this manages to be bad on two levels.
Indeed, yes. If you're not up on GI Joe lore, Snake Eyes as a character, he's an American, and kind of is meant to be kind of like the all American looking guy, like blonde hair, blue eyes. Um,
As non-Japanese looking as humanly possible.
right, yeah, and but he's an orphan kid in Japan, and I don't know the circumstances of how he ended up that way.
I think it was
But
intentionally mysterious. At least it was in the animated movie or animated series GI Joe Renegade from about 20 years ago.
right, yeah, and the what was yeah, in the live action movie from like 2009, I think. Um, but yeah, so he and originally he's an orphan living in Japan, and then he gets taken in by a ninja clan called the Arashikage, and the leader of that group is actually called the Hard Master, which there's their character in this movie called the Hard Master, but he's not the leader. But and he Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow were grew up together. They were like, they were like foster brothers, a bit like I don't know. I don't know if it's the right comparison, but sort of like Hamato Yoshi and Oroku Saki in Ninja Turtles. Kind of a similar relationship.
I'd also liken it a little bit to like Wolverine and Sabretooth in the
Mhm.
sense of, yeah, you have like two characters who are like brothers in arms, and one is a dark reflection of the other.
Right.
Yeah. With also a little bit of Cain and Abel thrown in because Storm Shadow was he was the native born one. He was seemingly the rightful heir, depending on the continuity. Like it could be he was the son, or it's like he was just always second best, but like, well, I'm the Japanese guy. I should be the top student here at this
Right.
ninja academy.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and there's an animated movie, short animated movie called GI Joe Resolute, which which I thought had a really good telling of their
Oh,
origins.
did I say Renegade? Okay, I
Well,
misremembered the
well,
title.
no, I think you were right.
It's
There was
either
one. There
Resolute or
was
Renegade. Let's find out.
Well, there was one called Renegade that kind of had like Mike Judge like animation.
Well, and it also had, weirdly enough, Charlie Adler as a surprisingly good version of Cobra Commander, which is funny considering he's usually known for his silly cartoon voices.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, and then but then there was another one called Resolute, and it was actually like I think it was like it was like short animated videos that they just condensed into
Okay,
one movie.
I was mistaking the word Renegade for Resolute. Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, and
that was written by Warren Ellis of all people.
right, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Um, and so yeah, and part of that too is that uh, Storm Shadow betrays the Hard Master, and
Mhm.
he works with Cobra to kill the Hard Master. But so that's kind of and it's in that same incident where Snake Eyes loses his voice, which is very important because in this movie he talks
A lot,
a
actually.
lot. Yeah.
Right. So it immediately fails as an adaptation of whatever version of lore you want because you don't actually end up in the same place. Like, spoiler alert, he is still totally verbal at the end of the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to be slightly nice here
Okay.
because if you're trying to make a movie and this is like the introduction to a character in the series, first off, no actor is going to want to portray a mute character and it's very hard to write a central narrative where a character is mute.
That's true. Yeah.
Uh, that apparently is one of the issues that happened that came during test screenings of the Wile E. Coyote versus Acme movie that got shelved.
Oh yeah, Wile E. Coyote never talks. Yeah.
Right, they didn't go with like the super genius version.
Yeah.
Um, the other is like I can be sympathetic with them wanting to make these changes. It's kind of similar to how like the Mandalorian, you know, not supposed to take his helmet off, but Pedro Pascal wants his face to be seen.
Hmm.
It's like how in Spider-Man 2 and 3, they got the criticism that the audience couldn't necessarily relate to Tobey Maguire with his helmet off, or his mask off, so frequently running around with his mask off.
Yeah, and the other thing, yeah, or like with Iron Man, they had to make that whole face thing for him so that you can kind of at least get the idea that he's in that suit. Robert Downey Jr. That is.
Right. So it's like I'm sympathetic to that problem
Yeah.
for this as a movie. The problem is that this is just kind of dull, and it has very much feels like it's superhero origin story syndrome.
Yeah, very much so. It felt a lot. It felt like a X-Men Origins Wolverine. Kind of had that similar vibe to it.
With the added disadvantage that this is having to be the ground floor for a new G.I. Joe universe. Because if this had been successful, and this was, I believe it was delayed by COVID and just hurt by that whole general period in movie releases. But I don't see this doing well even under the best of circumstances.
Yeah, I don't either. But yeah, so I guess we could probably get into the.
Do we have to? We're going to talk about in general terms why it fails.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
All right. So Henry Golding is our titular Snake Eyes, and so much was made at the time about it being a race swap. I looked into it. He is half Indonesian and half British, which is why he has the name Henry Golding. And I'll be honest that from the perspective of, like, while many Americans might not be able to tell the difference, from a Japanese perspective, he would stand out, and he does look different than the rest of the cast. So it's like, it's not an immediate deal killer in my opinion.
No, that's the least of this movie's problems.
Right. Because the setup is so stupid, because it manages to make our main character look bad in every way possible.
Oh yeah. It's a total character assassination of Snake Eyes.
Right. When, like, Snake Eyes is supposed to be a strong, silent type who, he's the one you bring in to get the job done.
Right.
And they have what in theory is a good setup at the start, though. Basically, he's out in the woods with his dad, who talks about being in a safe house, and young innocent Snake Eyes doesn't know what what a safe house is. Like, oh, is there a safe in the house? Nobody asked. Oh, I heard you on the phone. You said you were at a safe house. Never you mind, son.
Yeah.
And then it just like smash cuts to him being woken up in the middle of the night by his dad. Did that feel like abrupt to you too?
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Felt like there was might have been a filmed scene missing.
Probably, yeah. Like the bad guys coming up onto the house. Yeah.
Like there was like a little bit of that, but it's still like it was just very quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So his dad gets killed by some mysterious person who basically, okay, roll your dice and we'll see if you live. Oh, you rolled Snake Eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Spoiler: the dice are loaded.
I know, right? I definitely didn't see that one coming.
Oh yeah.
Now, like, my writer brain kept going, okay, so like in a competently done movie, the guy who killed his father would be the head of, like, he would either be an evil ninja or he would be the lead Cobra villain for the movie.
Yeah.
He is not.
He's not. He's not. Yeah. So then we jump cut 20 years later, where Snake Eyes he's fighting in a bunch of underground fight clubs. Then he gets recruited by this Yakuza boss to come work for him. And then a month later, then he's working down at the port in LA, and he meets another guy named Tommy, and we soon discover that Tommy is actually undercover, working for the because he's actually with the Arashikage, and the Yakuza boss is his cousin. And so
and like his disgraced cousin.
Yeah, his disgraced cousin. Yeah. And so they so they have this little thing where the Yakuza boss tries to have Snake Eyes kill Tommy, but he doesn't do it, and then they have this whole thing where this whole big escape thing, and next thing then Snake Eyes gets hurt, and then next we're on a private jet, and they're flying back to Japan, and Tommy, who I guess I'm going to say it's Storm Shadow.
Yeah, well, we don't care about spoilers. We're just here to kind of explain where this movie went awry.
Yes, yeah. And hey, creators outlet, good to see you.
Hey.
And yeah, so he it's so Storm Shadow takes him back because he wants Snake Eyes to join the Arashikage, and of course he tells him in order to join he has to go through these 3 trials, and the last trial is, of course, if he fails it he dies, and of course the one chick that works for him, Akiko, doesn't trust Snake Eyes at all, and with good reason, because he's actually working for the Yakuza guy.
Yep, like it was all an elaborate ruse to get him into the Arashikage. Arashikage, the ninja people.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
And the weird thing is that they felt the need to have a MacGuffin in there. By the way, it's not that here's where Snake Eyes' character is so confused. So it's like if he had been a legitimately bad person who had his eyes opened by the good ninja's philosophy, like seeing that there was another way, that I feel like that would be one thing. And I think they tried for that, but they also didn't want him to ever seem like too bad of a guy. So, oh, well, why was, well, or they wanted like to have some sort of justification. So it was like, oh, why is he working for the bad guys? Oh, well, the bad guys say that if he betrays the ninjas, then they'll give over his father's killer to him to have his revenge on.
Right. Yeah. And but then as it starts progressing, and you pointed this out when we were watching it, that he Snake Eyes quickly learns that the Yakuza guy is actually working with Cobra.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and then he finds out, and Snake Eyes finds out about Cobra, and then and he's like, oh, I didn't sign up for this. Oh, you're okay working with a Yakuza guy, you're an arms dealer and all this other stuff, but terrorists, no.
That's a step too far.
That's a bridge too far there.
Yeah, killing people for profit, that's totally acceptable. For political reasons, shame on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it's the character assassination, is that it would be so easy to restructure this. Like just commit to him early on, not be a good person, and just have his eyes open. You could even have it be like the love of a good woman. That's a favorite trope, right?
Yeah.
And also, he doesn't even kill the bad guy. And that's like, there's not, he doesn't even kill the guy who killed his father. We don't know what happens to that guy. He just lets him go because I guess he's learned some sort of lesson about forgiveness, ? Even though there really wasn't a sign that he had.
Yeah. And then and of course you've got 2 other
actually one other thought.
Yeah.
The other problem is that what kind of pansy ass ninja philosophy would lead you to the conclusion that you shouldn't kill your enemies who are dangerous to people?
Yeah.
That's like if he was joining, I don't know, if he was like just immediately joining G.I. Joe, then you could argue, okay, like you don't kill prisoners who are under your power.
Yeah.
Because there's rules of warfare to respect, but ninjas or if it was like a samurai thing, like, okay, well, there's some sort of honor code here, but ninjas are just like they're assassins and spies and stuff. Like, there's no rule in there for honor.
No. Yeah. Well, and that's the other part of with Snake Eyes Origins, is that he after what happened to him in Japan, he actually does go back to America and he joins the army.
Hmm.
So it's like, yeah, so like I don't know why they, at least have him be like maybe, like some kind of special forces guy. I don't know why they wouldn't do that, but yeah.
Yeah. So into this mix, there are a couple more elements added. We have the Baroness and Scarlet are introduced to represent Cobra and GI Joe respectively, as this plot brings them in when it kind of overcomplicates things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand why you would do it. Because if this is supposed to be the launching pad for your GI Joe verse, then you kind of can't leave it until the last minute, even though Iron Man didn't exactly make Shield a central component until Iron Man 2.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone wants to rush their Marvel universe, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, I can kind of understand the inclusion of Scarlet because she's like kind of fits in with his backstory. Um, he actually trains her to be in the art of ninjutsu.
Didn't they kind of have like some sort of low-key romantic tension?
Yes, they did.
Kind of
Yeah.
like a forlorn Wolverine and Jean Grey type thing.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, and then Duke was basically the Cyclops of that trio of that triangle.
Yeah. The other element they add, which is like the dumb comic book movie element, is the uh, the Ninja Clan is hiding a secret artifact that is held behind a DNA encoded door that is like it's a crystal that can generate heat energy if you think at it hard.
Yeah.
And it's like this is like the clan's sacred mission to keep people from getting this MacGuffin. There's a number of problems with this from my perspective. First off, I would say that most of the movie doesn't have like the tone of a universe that has a lot of supernatural elements. There's really only two things that are outside the ordinary. One of the tests involves giant anacondas in Japan. Yes, giant anacondas in Japan. They're specifically called anacondas. Um, and like we're talking like anacondas that could have eaten a small dinosaur, or even actually no, a large dinosaur even.
Yeah, those are big snakes.
Yep. And then the other thing is this jewel, which if it was like, I don't know, medieval Japan, Tokugawa Japan, that would have been like a super weapon of the highest order.
Mm-hmm.
But in theory, if you're a GI Joe or Cobra and you have access to modern arms at all, you can more or less match it. The only reason that the bad guys do so well with it is that they're attacking a bunch of ninjas who don't seem to believe in guns.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, attacking from long range like smart people.
Yes.
Like if you insist on using old school weapons, somebody with a bow and arrow could have dealt with that problem in 3 minutes flat.
Yeah.
And so now part of this betrayal, yeah, Snake Eyes does betray Storm Shadow, is that he gets some of Storm Shadow's blood on a handkerchief to beat the DNA lock, gets the bad guys, the dingus, spares his father's killer, and then gets cold feet and goes to try to help fight it. And the thing is that part of Storm Shadow's promise is that he would never actually use the device himself. And in the course of things, he gets the hold of the jewel and tries to use it to defend the family. Now, we have left out the character of I believe it's his grandmother.
Yes.
Who is the head of the clan, because she is largely irrelevant.
Yeah.
In fact, I would go so far as to say that I'm gonna use a word I don't like using. I think that her role in things is a woke element, because it just struck me right now, if traditionally he is learning ninjutsu from the hard master, and the hard master is now just a guy in the group.
Yeah.
The inclusion of this character is kind of unnecessary, and they kept having these weird girl boss moments with that were very reminiscent of Avengers Endgame with Scarlet, the Scarlet Baroness and her in like frequently moving together as a unit, as if to emphasize that, yeah, these kick-ass powerful women are doing things for themselves.
Yeah, and never mind the fact that one of them's a bad guy.
Yes.
Oh.
Because basically the bad guy betrays Cobra, but
yeah.
And so Storm Shadow is basically told, yeah, you're never going to be the head of this family, but you can keep working for us. And he is understandably pissed because he just had his birthright that he's worked so hard to maintain taken away because a guy betrayed him and seems to be having no consequences.
Yeah.
Like he's been forgiven.
Yeah. Yes, Storm Shadow's feelings and actions are totally justified.
Especially because there's no evidence that like if it was like, oh, it was like, oh, the jewel is too powerful. Okay, like, so what? If you picked up an anti-tank rocket launcher, would you also go, oh, you've been corrupted by the power of the anti-tank rocket launcher? about as dangerous as the jewel.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Like, it's not like they said it's like the power is corrupted. If it was like, oh, this is an evil thing that will slowly corrupt and kill you,
yeah,
like then it would be like make sense. Like just using it the one time in defensively would be like a reason to ban him.
yeah.
And so it's like I end the movie thinking that our main character, who doesn't appear in the iconic costume until the very last frame, is kind of a inconsistent jerk.
Yeah.
And his future rival is actually completely justified.
Yes. Yeah. As Tony Stark would say, not a great plan.
Yeah. So if we look at it from the perspective of, did this adapt the canon well? No, absolutely not.
No.
Is even a good coherent story? No, not at all. Because the acting ranges from okay to sorry, Samara Weaving as Scarlet, very wooden. Kind of came across as Kroger Julia Sweeney.
Oh,
Sydney Sweeney. I always get mixed up the name of the woman from Saturday Night Live. But
yeah.
It was Kroger brand Sydney Sweeney.
Yeah, which is weird because I've seen her in other things, and she was really good in other movies. I don't know why she acted like that. I guess she was just trying to be tough, macho army woman.
Just trying so hard to be stoic that she just had no personality whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
Ursula Corbero as Baroness was more fun.
Yeah.
I think Henry Golding was just. I think he could have done a good Snake Eyes if it had been like this version of Snake Eyes if it had been written better. But
yeah.
The only really positive thing I can say about this movie is that it has the action scenes have sort of a ninja infused Michael Bay over the top quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's some cool bits. There's some nice visuals.
Yeah. Some of the CGI looked a little rough, but
like the snakes.
Yeah, the snakes. Yeah. Yeah. But I this movie's a hard pass for me. I mean,
yeah.
As much as I like G.I. Joe, because I grew up with the cartoon show, but yeah, like the live action movies that they've tried to make have been very subpar in my opinion.
Yeah, I liked the second one with The Rock, and because they made I think they made the smart choice of trimming down the cast a bit.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is that, and you asked, why didn't they just have Snake Eyes be in the military?
Yeah.
It occurs to me that for a movie franchise with this budget and attempting to go up against Marvel and DC, they probably didn't want to make them American military explicitly. Like I bet if this had continued, they would have had G.I. Joe as they said in the UK version of the theme song, the international hero.
Yeah.
Might have honestly been why they started off with Snake Eyes in Japan, just they could punt on having to figure out how much U.S. military to inject into it.
No, yeah, probably. Yeah, well, all I can say is, for uh, I wonder. I'm sure the people at Paramount were when they saw this movie, they were probably thinking this.
Morons! I have morons on my payroll!
It's sad how often that clip is applicable.
Yeah. uh,
This movie failed. They aren't continuing on with it, so there's no reason to hold a grudge.
yes.
Or
yes.
even the grudge.
Yes. Yeah, so this was my solo movie for the week, as my descent into the J horror rabbit hole continues. Yeah, so I watched Ju-on the Grudge. Now, like The Ring from last week, I have not seen the American version of this movie, so I can't comment on it. But this movie, from the poster, it says from the creators of Ringu. Definitely, I can definitely see the similarities between the two, because both movies deal with people who were murder victims, and they become vengeful spirits and prey on the living. In the case of The Grudge, it's a mother and a son who were brutally murdered by the husband and dad, and they are now haunting this little house in Tokyo. And anybody who goes into the house ends up getting killed by one of them. And the movie is very episodic, almost anthological, because they focus on like specific characters throughout the movie that go into the house and then find themselves victims of. I'm trying to remember the Toshio is the name of the kid, and I can't remember the name of the mom. But yeah, it's really just like it's basically all it is. Really, is it's just but these the people who fall victim to it, and the curse keeps getting passed on to other people.
Mhm.
And it starts off with this young social worker named Rika, and she's sent to the house because she's got to look out on this old lady who is living there with her son and daughter-in-law. And she clearly, the old lady has like, probably has dementia of some kind. And when Rika's in the house, that's when she sees the little boy. And then, she sees this like spirit that's hanging over the old lady. And yeah, it just kind of, and then, she recovers from it. And then, she's talking to the police, and the police, the police officer says, well, the couple doesn't have they don't have any kids. So they're like, well, who's this kid? And then they basically unravel the mystery of what happened in the house. And just basically, and it's, like I said, it's just, it follows all these different characters, from like Rika to the couple and the old lady that were living in the house, to the cop who was investigating the murders, and the cop's daughter when she gets to be a teenager. It's also told non-linearly, a bit like a Christopher Nolan movie.
Now you had mentioned that I believe you mentioned last week that the Ring was also almost a police procedural more than a horror movie.
Yeah, this one kind of felt that way too. And yeah, like a police procedural mixed with a haunted house.
Okay.
Yeah, and And the ending is kind of interesting because it's like it implies that the curse with this mom and this boy spread out to everywhere, because they show like the streets of Tokyo and the neighborhood's just completely empty. Yeah, it's kind of a very dark ending to the movie. And what I didn't know was that this is technically the third movie.
Really?
Yeah, there were two other movies, Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2. And I don't know anything about those. But yeah, this movie is it's right up there with your standard J horror, creepy, like kind of like when you're alone in your house at night and you draw the curtains and you're going to see some kid, ghostly looking kids staring at you, like
Yeah, as opposed to a long-haired girl coming out of the TV.
Right, yeah.
You just change what kind of pale, dead-looking person is creeping on you.
Right, yeah. And by the way, in most movies like this, they're very shy about showing like too much of the killer or too much of the entity or whatever. This movie isn't shy about it. They show those two all the time and scare the you know what out of you. So,
so it sounds like a recommend.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like The Ring. This one's also on Shudder. So yeah, it's a classic J horror movie for a reason, and like The Ring, it's been parodied quite a bit in anime and manga. So yeah.
So it's kind of like when we watched Jaws, where it opens your third eye to like, oh, that's what that was a reference to.
Yes, yeah.
Let's see. I don't have a transition to my solo review, which was a movie of not quite as high of quality as The Grudge. Hocus Pocus 2. So I ended up watching this one with the family when I was over last week, the day after Halloween, because they had been interested in watching it, and I ended up having to leave early on Halloween because of issues I won't go into. But Hocus Pocus 2. Now, Daniel, you have not had the pleasure of seeing the original, as I recall.
You are correct. Yes, I've not seen that.
So the quick 30,000-foot view I also admit I haven't seen the original since I was a child. The main thing I remember from it was that my mother was kind of horrified that we had seen it because she isn't like big on horror and she thought it was kind of icky. My dad kind of agreed. I don't recall what age I saw it at. So I don't know if that was just a matter of them being more sensitive to such things than I was, or if it was actually an issue. But basically, you had these three witches who were played by Bette Midler in the middle, Sarah Jessica Parker on the right, and Kathy Najimy on the left, who I had not realized was the voice of Peggy Hill on King of the Hill.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, she really doesn't sound like her in this, so that's, good on her for having a voice range.
Yeah.
But so the original premise is that you have these three witch sisters in Salem who they killed or cursed somebody because they're three witchy sisters. A boy was seeming to break them up. And so Bette Midler's character, Winifred, who is kind of the ringleader, ended up either cursing or killing the guy. He was a zombie in this movie.
Oh, okay.
Recurring character from the other one. And there was another, and memory serves, there was another townsperson who was turned into a cat and had basically been stuck as a cat since the 1600s. But he's not in this movie. But basically, if the spell is read and a candle is lit, then the three sisters would return and cause mayhem. In the original movie, they returned, caused mayhem, but they were banished. So they have come back again because of the three characters who are young good witches, because you gotta appease the Wicca crowd, right?
Right. Yeah.
Who decide to try this ritual out because every Halloween they do a spell together. But there's there's discord in the group because one of them got a boyfriend who's a jock, and he seems to be very mean to the other two, and their friendship is strained.
Oh no.
I would put this. So I remember the first one being like, it wasn't completely serious because these three basically have Three Stooges vibes. You have Winifred as the slightly more intelligent leader, the Mo.
Yeah.
Then you have Sarah Jessica Parker as the. Everybody I've ever talked to who watched this movie as a kid was shocked to realize that the hot witch was Sarah Jessica Parker. Because here's the thing, I'm not calling her ugly or anything. She's just kind of not famous for being Vava Voom or anything, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the South Park had a whole bit about.
Yeah.
with the yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, there's even some movie where she was like, "Do you think I have a face like a horse?" and yet, there she is as the sexy one. But anyway,
Yeah.
but she's like the dumb blonde. Then you have Kathy Najimy as the second most intelligent one, who is also the source of most of like what I'd call the vamping for the camera, like a lot of like the intentional jokes, like fart noises and things like that.
Oh. Yeah.
I believe this is mostly intact from the original, but it's definitely been dialed back on the horror front.
Yeah.
In fact, I would say like I would be astonished if anybody but the smallest of children managed to be scared by this.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably.
Because basically, okay, so it starts off with a flashback to when the three became witches, which is actually not all that relevant to things until the very end. The nicest thing about it is that what I'll say is that it was a way to reintroduce the plot line with the boy who split them up. So that's something, I guess.
Yeah.
It also I don't know how they did it. I don't know if it was her granddaughter or something. In fact, let me look that up. There was whoever they picked to play young Winifred. Taylor Henderson as young Winifred looked so much like her and got the acting down so perfectly that if I found out she was her granddaughter or something, I would not be the least bit shocked.
Yeah.
No reference to that, so I'm just going to assume that she was just well cast.
Yeah, and probably watched the original movie a lot to get her mannerisms down.
Yep, probably. So the three witches have been freed. The of the three main characters, two of them are mostly around, and the third one is really not because of the strained friendship. So it's like, why is she even in the movie after a certain point?
Yeah.
Like they don't like the three main witches like don't really get a lot of development at all. They're just like a diverse group of witch inclined people who've just been shoved into the situation. The humor reminded me a bit of the Addams Family, where it's like you have horrific people or horror themed people who are just kind of flummoxed by modern technology and society.
Yeah.
Like they try to say, oh, they pretend to be like advanced witches, and they take them to Walgreens to eat some anti-aging cream to help them stay alive, and like, oh, you don't need to eat our souls. Like we have anti-aging creams and magic, so you can just get the children's souls right from this. And so like they're eating beauty cream and stuff like that.
Oh, jeez.
So that gives an idea of the basic humor of this.
Yeah.
They also have some fun where they're trying to get brooms at one point, and instead the two of Kathy Najimy's character ends up riding on two Roombas that she enchants, because broom equivalents.
Right.
And they're actually used in sort of a clever way later. And in the end, one of the three girls develops Rey Skywalker style magic, where she can suddenly roughly match the three witches.
Of course.
And the three witches, I won't say how, the three witches are kind of almost redeemed in the end, sort of, kind of, which is weird. Or at least it shows that one of them cares more about her sisters than the MacGuffin they were after, which was ultimate power. I would call this movie, to quote Hitchhiker's Guide from the Galaxy, mostly harmless. Like, there were a couple of interesting gags, a couple of interesting visuals, a couple of neatish ideas, but I wouldn't recommend that anybody go out of their way to watch it. I decided to look it up, and it got a passing grade from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. But on the flip side, the audience gave it like a 47% or 45%, which to my mind says that they took away whatever edge the original fans liked from it. So I guess it's kind of, but my parents kind of, like, my dad didn't think it was very good, but like he thought it was less icky. So I guess that they sanded off the edges for people who didn't really approve of the original movie.
So Arcos said it's an unnecessary sequel bait. Was it at least mildly entertaining? It sounds like it was a little.
Yeah, like I wasn't horribly bored the whole time. Which is more than I can say for a lot of Disney sitcom grade entertainment.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say to its benefit is that the three leads were amusing to watch. They were clearly having a good time with it. So, even though it was 30 years after the original. I'd also heard some people saying at the time that this should have gone to theaters, considering Disney didn't have a great 2022 theater lineup.
Yeah.
But I feel like it would have looked too cheap in theaters.
Okay, so it was pretty low budget.
Yeah, like not a whole lot of effects. The sets and camera angles did kind of have a TV movie feel to them. So Disney Plus is probably where it belonged.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in terms of unnecessary franchise cash grabs, definitely way more offended by Snake Eyes than by this.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yep. Yeah. But it was at least very familiar.
Yeah.
Speaking of movies that feel oddly familiar, Jaws.
Dun, 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 dun.
So Daniel, I had never actually sat down and watched this movie before. What was your history with it?
So my history with it was it's kind of interesting. When I was in high school, about 15, 16 years old, I went to Universal here in Orlando with my parents, and my dad and I went on the Jaws ride there. And the tour guide on the ride at one point asks everybody, "Okay, who here's seen Jaws?" And I was the only one who didn't raise my hand. And my dad looked at me and he's like, "You haven't seen Jaws?" I'm like, "No."
Like you're the one who would have shown me.
Yeah. Like it wasn't a staple of my home, It wasn't a staple of our viewing, it wasn't our regular movie viewing, but but I finally watched it in college. So yeah. And then I think that was the last time I watched it. So it's been, 15, 20 years since I'd last seen this.
Meanwhile, I had never actually sat down to see it, like I had mentioned before. But yeah, if you've lived in American movie and TV culture from 1976 on, I was completely unastonished at just how well I knew the beats of this movie as they were happening.
Yeah.
So it almost felt like a rewatch.
Oh, yeah. Well, and not only have the clips from the movie been like floating around forever, like it like much like my solo review, this movie has been parodied and spoofed like so many times. It's just everybody's familiar with it.
Yep. I mean, considering it was the original Hollywood blockbuster that came out in '76, or I should say the first modern Hollywood blockbuster.
Yeah.
Between Spielberg doing Jaws and George Lucas doing Star Wars the next year, that basically set the same movie template that we've been living with ever since.
Yep. Yeah.
Because what occurred to me is that this was basically what would have, if this had been made in the 50s, it would have been called like Shark. And it would have been a B movie that people would have gone to drive-ins to make out to in the background.
Right. Yeah. Which that was Spielberg's big thing. Like he loved movies like that. He used to see.
Now that I think about it, a lot of his career outside of more serious stuff like Schindler's List is basically just taking B movie premises. Dinosaurs are attacking. Aliens have arrived. Aliens have arrived, but they're kind of cute. Just like doing them on a bigger scale.
Yeah, right. Yeah, even Indiana Jones. Yeah, it was kind of based on
yeah.
those 1930s serials. Yeah. But yeah. So with this movie, you have it's actually based on a novel for those of you who aren't aware of it, by Peter Benchley.
Who has actually kind of gone on to regret the novel because this made people really afraid of sharks and has not helped shark conservation efforts, unfortunately.
Yeah. But I actually remember watching a documentary about sharksploitation, and his widow actually does have a shark conservation group or conservation, like whatever,
charity.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, certain species of sharks were almost driven to the brink, were driven to extinction. Yeah, after this movie.
Yeah. But all right, so we're going to approach this from perspective of if you're at all interested in movies, you have probably seen it, or if you're like us, or if you're like me, I should say, you basically know all the outline to it.
Yeah. So the basic plot of the movie is you've got this you have a New England island, kind of like actually they filmed it in Martha's Vineyard.
Okay.
Yeah, and although it's not called Martha's Vineyard, it's called Amity Island. And so it's one of these like tour, little New England towns where it's a beach town, and they make all of their money in the summer with all the tourists. Unfortunately for them, they've got a great white shark patrolling their beaches and killing swimmers.
Yep. And so there's a little bit of a mystery about what's going on at first. Roy Scheider plays, let's see, pull up
Brody.
His name here. Yep, Brody, the local police chief, who doesn't care for the water.
Yeah. And I think his wife says something like, "Oh, it was like childhood trauma," I think. And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Dreyfuss's character, who's he's an oceanographer, but he's like, well, why, if you hate the water, why you only live on an island? Well, because it doesn't look like an island when I look at it from far away or whatever, or when it doesn't feel like an island when I'm on it, or I think that's what he said.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And as they're investigating, so they find the opening woman who is famously on every movie poster for this ever made.
Yeah.
They find her remains, and they bring in Richard Dreyfuss, who is, as Brody's wife says, So my husband tells me you're in sharks.
Yeah.
A biologist, shark expert.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so he's brought in to investigate. So I say Brody is the straight man. Hit my mic there. Sorry.
Sorry.
But Richard Dreyfuss playing Hooper. He is the kind of nutty academic.
Yeah.
Because like he's the one with the most jokes. He's the one with the most like he does odd voices at times. I don't think I can take much more of this abuse.
Yeah. Well, it's Richard Dreyfuss. I mean,
yeah. Then you've got Robert Shaw as Quint, the old fisherman.
Yes, and yeah, his most people know his famous introduction to the movie where he's running his nails on the chalkboard.
Yep, which is kind of a perfect introduction to the character because he's just a salty old cuss who doesn't listen to people, like doesn't think much of women, doesn't like he's just a weird loner. Although you find out a bit why he might have a couple of screws loose later.
Yeah. So then as the shark attacks happen, is particularly over their biggest weekend, which is of course the 4th of July,
right?
And which includes Brody's one of Brody's kids almost getting eaten. He finally Brody just has enough, and he's like, all right, we need to go get the shark. And so they hire Quint and he and Dreyfuss, Hooper, they get on his boat and go get Jaws. And that's
there's almost two halves to this movie, as I would put it. The first half is the setup, where it's like, okay, is there a shark? Like, okay, you kind of know from the start that a shark is attacking. Just because even though you don't see what gets the girl, like you're watching a movie called Jaws, you saw the poster with a giant shark.
Yeah.
Unless you happened to come across this on TV, having never heard of Jaws, you would, you know that it's a giant shark.
Right. Yeah.
And then like the first half, and I think this is something they might have had to do at the time. Okay, so we've seen movies where, like made in the 90s, where they kind of had to explain to people what email or the internet was, right?
Right. Yeah.
I almost feel like this movie felt the need to do the same thing with sharks because like this kind of made Sharkmania, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I think that they kind of had to explain, okay, what if people kind of vaguely know that sharks are fish, but they kind of had to explain some of the details of sharks. Like, there's different types of sharks. Here's the big ones.
Yeah.
At the time, sharks were kind of a mystery. I thought it was kind of interesting that, as somebody who watches too many nature specials, like we don't even know how old sharks are. They could be 2,000 or 3,000. Like, sharks could live to 2,000 or 3,000 years, and it's like, yeah, no. Like there's a species called the Greenland shark that just lives at extremely it's about the size of a great white, but it moves at like the speed of smell, basically.
No.
It has such a slow metabolism that they can live for centuries, but
yeah. The part where Brody's reading all the books about sharks, I kind of had to chuckle because I'm like, if this was made today, he'd be on the internet looking at that stuff.
Right. He'd be on sharkconspiracy.com or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to set up how the sharks operate, how sharks work, what sharks are exactly, and then you can get to the part where they're hunting the shark.
Yeah.
And I'd say the three are a very effective duo because you almost have like three different strains of masculinity, three different kinds of guy personalities.
Yeah.
Because you have Hooper, who's kind of the bookish goof.
Yeah.
Who does not get along well with Quint, the hardened, almost toxically masculine seaman.
Yeah.
And you were telling me before the show, apparently those two did not get on together behind the scenes.
No, they did not. They hated each other.
So that makes it actually really fitting that their characters were at each other's throats for the whole movie.
Yeah.
At least until they had their male bonding scene in the
Mhm.
middle, or the middle of the second half.
Yeah.
And then you had Brody as still being very nervous about what was going on because he hated being on the water. So he's forced to be out there with these two doing dangerous stuff on the water, having to get over his fears.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course the had the famous another famous scene where he's throwing the chum into the water trying to lure the shark, and then the shark pops out of the water at him, and then he lurches back, and then he's like, "You're gonna need a bigger boat."
Yeah, and I hadn't. There's a lot of things where now I have the context of these lines because because kind of interesting because like at the time, people I'm used to thinking of that as just a joke because people always quote it as a joke.
Yeah.
Where in context, it's basically the man having a minor nervous breakdown. It's like
Yeah.
there's no logical way for them to suddenly get a bigger boat at this point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the male bonding scene, where they're sitting in sitting around the table and getting drunk, uh, and then we have Quint's famous monologue where he was talking about being a crew member of the USS Indianapolis, and they were delivering the bomb to Hiroshima, and then they got torpedoed by the Japanese, and the ship sank, and then they were stuck out in the open water, surrounded by surrounded by sharks.
They look at you, looking all fake with those eyes, like a doll's eyes.
Yeah, yeah. That monologue, by the way, that's still that. Like, I remember the first time I watched that gave me chills, and it still does. Because and by the way, for those of you wondering, that actually happened. It was a real thing. With the Indianapolis. And actually, this movie was what raised a lot of the awareness about it, because a lot of people didn't know that happened. Yeah.
Right. Well, as he said, it was kind of hush hush because they didn't want it to be. They kind of wanted to keep the bomb that they were delivering secret. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think they made a movie about that with Nicolas Cage, but that's on
Well, as he said, it was kind of. Oops. Sorry.
It's all right.
Anyhow, so I would say that so I'm going to be. I occasionally do let my subjective state of mind at the time interfere with my enjoyment of things. I'm going to say in the first half, I'm kind of dealing with a family member approaching end of life. So I wasn't necessarily in the best headspace for scene after scene of jump scares with dead bodies, watch people being devoured senselessly, that kind of thing. So I kind of had to watch the movie in 15-minute chunks before I just kind of, my feelings just kind of overwhelm me a little bit.
Yeah.
There is nothing objectively wrong with any part of that first half.
No.
Then once we got to the second half where they were actually solving the problem, I was much more on board with it.
Yeah, it felt more like an action movie. Yeah.
Right. It switches from horror to action.
Yeah.
And of course, the other problem is that I kind of knew how the movie ended.
Yeah.
But much like other movies we've seen before where just cultural osmosis, you basically know the movie already. It let me keep more of an eye out for setup and payoff. Because the shark is killed by him getting a canister of compressed air in his mouth and then getting it shot, which blows him to heck and back.
Yeah.
But they did a very good job they established the canister. They established that the canister was under pressure and it was dangerous. They kept periodically showing the canisters.
Yeah.
just to remind you that they were there.
Yeah.
Movie has an excellent set of setup and payoff that way, and also with things like at the end, the ship is sunk, and what do you know? They had 5 of those floaters, 5 of those floating barrels. 3 of them were used up on the shark, and then they had 2 left over after the ship sank. So it's like they had exactly as many barrels as they needed.
Yeah.
So it was just a very, and it's 2 hours long. Very, it had a very nice pace, especially once you got into the action movie section of it.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, it'd be remiss without, or if I didn't mention the God tier soundtrack.
Oh yes. Well, yeah. Well, it's John Williams. I mean,
Yep. The man doesn't do a lot of bad work.
No, he doesn't.
What kind of startled me was that, so I think I mentioned this to Daniel as I was watching it, that whenever I was watching a scene that I hadn't seen parodied or clipped somewhere, it felt like watching DLC for a video game I'd already played. Because not every scene in the movie is an immediate banger that gets referenced all over the place.
Right. Yeah.
The scenes with Robert Shaw tend to get a lot of attention. Scenes with the shark, of course, get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I had to cough there.
That's all right.
But like, the first half of the movie, the setup half, that doesn't get referenced as often.
Yeah. The only one part of it I can think of is like when the townspeople are like, "Are you going to close the beaches?"
Also, in what was it, Caddyshack, with the scene with the chocolate bar in the pool where they had the Jaws theme.
Oh yeah.
With similar shots.
Yeah.
That's your other interesting things. So one aspect is that the mayor, of course, didn't want to shut down the beach the whole time.
Yeah.
Apparently in the novelization, that's because he owed a lot of money to the mob.
Oh.
So he didn't dare hurt the town revenue.
Right. Yeah.
I can see why they didn't bother to adapt that for the movie, because that, like, I almost even thought, everyone kind of gets off, the mayor kind of gets off kind of lightly, considering he kept convincing Brody to keep the beach open against his better judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and telling the medical examiner that the first girl at the beginning of the movie didn't die from a shark, but from a boat propeller.
Yeah, trying to talk his way out of the actual problem.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought was of course, the other behind the scenes thing that everybody's heard of, the shark isn't on screen very often because they kept having trouble with the animatronics seizing up when it was full of seawater.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one of the greatest examples of creativity through adversity ever, because the shark is honestly at its most efficient or its most effective when you only see little glimpses of it.
Yeah. Yeah, like the fin coming out of the water, or just seeing its mass, under the water. Yeah.
Right, as opposed to it being in your face, Jaws moving.
Right.
Those are arguably the least effective parts of the movie.
Yeah.
Really, although not that they're bad exactly, but because it's a 1970s animatronic, a good 1970s animatronic, but still a 1970s animatronic.
Right. Yeah.
Also, I was kind of startled that once the final attack began, how much of the shark you actually saw, just because of that reputation of you saw so little of the shark.
Yeah. 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 Like Quint's death scene is pretty brutal.
Yeah, it's very much like I kind of was thinking of Captain Ahab going down. But so I would say that the first half I kept thinking, okay, so this is like kind of rudimentary at this point, but I'm totally willing to think that that's just because I was kind of depressed at the time.
Yeah.
But the second half got me out of that depression, so.
Yeah.
So that's actually a big mark in its favor.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, as you pointed out, DB, most people have probably seen this movie already, and if they haven't, they've seen it referenced and everything. But if you have not actually seen this movie, you definitely need to give it a watch.
Definitely, because even knowing all the bits out of context, the connective tissue was actually just about as good.
Yeah,
And it's just like a master class in. I would say that if you're at all interested in writing, like we are, it's a master class of kind of male bonding, male relationships, how to write characters who are at odds with each other, who can get over it.
yeah,
And just like how to write very simple characters, because the only character who really needs an in-depth origin is is Quint, the fisherman, and we get it. And they managed to get the backstory is done well because it just enhances the horror of what's going on, because it tells you what Jaws is going to show up and do.
yeah.
You can also see why they made sequels to this dumb thing, because money. But
Yeah. And on top of all of the rip-offs and knockoffs that they did too,
like Orca or the Italian shark movies, just
Piranha, yeah.
But I would say this is in the category of, even if you basically know the outline of the movie, still worth a watch.
Indeed, yeah, and you can see where Steven Spielberg started.
Well, technically, Steven Spielberg got his start doing the first proper episode of Columbo.
Oh, okay.
Which, it's funny. When I was watching that episode, I kept thinking to myself, man, they're really they're kind of going for the fences with the directing here. I wonder who did that. And then the credits start, Steven Spielberg, what?
What? Oh.
And he was allowed to really do whatever he felt like for directing wise. So I actually noticed some similarities in shots from that episode that were out on the lake that kind of made me think of Jaws. So, so if you want to kind of see Steven Spielberg's real beginning, there you go. First proper episode of Columbo. Not one of the movies, but Columbo itself.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. Yeah. Well, I think we've said all we need to say for tonight.
Yep. I would say fairly mixed bag, but we had Jaws to finish off, so it was a strong ending.
Indeed, yes. Well, thank you for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate it as always.
Indeed.
Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ring the bell, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next week, everybody.
Good night.